Chapter 18. Green is Good. By the time I turned 12 and reached grade 8, I'd given up the idea of playing a competitive team sport. In high school, organized inter-school sports moved from Friday afternoons to Saturdays, but we didn't escape the compulsory sports altogether. On Tuesday afternoons, we had to do what the school called healthy and leisure activities. At the start of each year, we were offered a range of options. I gave it as little thought as possible and chose lawn bowls. I had no idea what it really involved, but at least it would be better than the made-up misfit sports we had to play in primary school. On the first Tuesday, we rolled up at the YM Ex-Services Bowl Club, located on the waterfront next to the local dump. Dad and I would go to the dump every now and then, and he'd let me scavenger for treasure. Junk hunting by the bay. As we hopped off the bus, we were welcomed by the bunch of volunteers who were all ages in their 60s and 70s. They were happy to talk to us young kids and get us on our way to our first game of bowls. The game was played on a grassy lawn called a green. Each green was about 5 meters wide and 30 meters long. Greens were bunched together on a field with 5 or 6 side by side. The goal was to finish each round or end of the game with your bowls closest to the jack, a small white bowl a little larger than a pool ball. The bowls were smaller on one side, which meant they would swing in a curve or bias after being delivered rather than rolling straight. Balance was the first problem I encountered. Normally, players would bend both knees and step forward as they released the bowl. My left leg had no knee, so that approach wasn't going to work for me. Instead, I stretched out to the side and placed my left hand on the ground for extra support. This made it difficult to look up, and most of the time, instead of looking at the jack, I looked down at the ground. I wasn't much good to begin with, but I felt I understood what I had to do to get the bowl where it needed to go, at least in theory. We had a volunteer who taught us the basics, and then we spent another half an hour playing in teams. I was captain and was competing against Sean Luck. Sean was a bright kid, smart and quick-witted. He was the first kid in the class to be onto a first fad or a new gadget, and was very competitive. Sean and I treated our game like the grudge match of the century. Bowls went everywhere, short, long, wide, wider. I doubt I got any width 2 meters of the jack, but the weight of the ball made sense in my head. It felt heavy enough for me to know I could send it down the other end with force when needed, but light enough that I could deliver it to the finest it deserved. It felt good, and I won. Rematch next week, Hodgson said. It was not a question. Sure thing, I said. I'll beat you again then, too. I hardly thought about lawn bowls in the interviewing week, but by Tuesday, I was set to return to battle. When we arrived, we had a new volunteer trainer. He introduced himself as Frank Plant. Frank was a member of the nearby William Bowls Club, but had come to the neighboring club to help out. We introduced ourselves. Ready to get down to business? Sean and I made sure we were together for the rematch, but it wasn't quite that easy. Okay, Frank said. Let's have a look at how you bowl. It's okay, Mr. Plant, I said. We learned all about it last week. We're ready to play now. He looked at me for a second, then gave me a crooked smile. Robert, isn't it? Frank said. Yes. First thing, Robert, he said. Call me Frank, because that's my name. Okay. Also, we're not going to play straight away, he said. You can't learn to bowl just in 1 week. There's a lot of technique to master. Inwardly, I groaned. Sean shrugged. We both figured that if we knuckled down and pretended to focus on mastering new skills, it would be just like last week. We'd be competing in half an hour. Frank watched a few of the other kids bowl and made some suggestions. Then it was my turn on the mat. Frank looked me over as I took up my usual stance. I stuck my right leg forward, knee bent, pointing the direction I wanted the bowl to go. Then I swung my left leg in the big arc and planted it most particularly to my right. That meant, as I was low to the ground and had to arch my back to have enough room to swing my arm and deliver the bowl. That forced me to put my left hand on the ground for stability. I looked like a human spider. The bowl I delivered wobbled out of my hand and came to a rest about as far from the jack as possible without ending up in the gutter. I looked up as I delivered the bowl and saw Frank watching intensely. "Send another bowl down, Robert," he said. I did. The result wasn't much better. "Is there a reason you look at the ground when you bowl?" Frank said. "Not really," I said. "Keep your head up," he said. "Keep your eye on where you want the bowl to end up." I craned my head forward, eyes focused intently on my target. But watching my arm swing forward had become habit, and my head started to drift down again. "Eyes up," Frank shouted, just as I was about to let the bowl go. It shot off wildly, wobbling off to an off-target finish. Behind me, someone laughed. "Try it again," Frank said, "and keep your eyes forward." I forced myself to look straight ahead. The bowl left my hand clean and smooth. It rolled, and I kept watching as it got closer to the jack. It looked as if it was going to land right next to it, but it turned late and overshot the mark about a meter. "Bloody brilliant, Robert," Frank shouted. Frank carried a few more pounds than he probably should have, but it gave his face a jolly look, especially when he'd shout out, "Good bowl," or "Nice shot." The other kids took turns bowling, and Frank gave them feedback too. Some listened, but others didn't care much and just walked up to the mat and hurled the bowl down. We spent the rest of the afternoon taking turns delivering bowls, with Frank offering suggestions for improvement. It was a big help for me, and I could already feel I was getting better sense of the basics. About 20 minutes before we had to pack up and return to school, Sean shouted out to Frank, "Are we going to have a few quick ends? We need to have a rematch from last week." "Not today," Frank said. "There's more practicing to be done, maybe in a few weeks." Sean turned and looked at me. Well, I don't want this guy next week, but I knew I did. We turned up for ex-service clubs every week and bowl our hearts out for an hour or so before we were packed up and on the bus sent home. I'd seek out Frank as often as I could for extra coaching, even when other kids were getting straight into the game. One day, Frank pulled me aside. "You like playing lawn bowls, don't you, Robert?" he asked. "Yep," I said. "Would you like to come down to my club on Saturday? Maybe meet one of the coaches and be assessed for disabled bowling?" I didn't even know there was a special category for disabled bowling. "I'd love to," I said. "I'll ask my parents about it." Frank gave me a thumbs up. Mom and Dad were keen, so the next Saturday we went to Wham Bowls Club, which was just across the road from the tennis club where Catherine played. I introduced Mom and Dad to Frank, and we set up to bowl. Frank brought along Peter Reed, one of the club coaches, and they watched me bowl, made suggestions, and chatted to each other for about 2 hours. Like Frank, Peter was impressed with how I bowled, given my stance and habit of starting on the ground while I delivered my bowls. At the end of the session, Frank and my parents talked. They thanked him for the extra effort he was putting into with me. "I'm 70 now, and didn't have too much to look forward to," he told them. "Doing this for Robert has given me a revived interest." Now, I was playing lawn bowls every Tuesday and Saturday. The Saturday sessions gradually became more important, with Frank and Peter trying to improve my swing and my delivery. My stance remained a problem, though. Even with my left leg stretched out beside me and one hand on the ground, I wasn't stable. They decided I needed some sort of support, something that would give me a closer to normal stance and provide stability. Frank said he had an idea to sort it out. A few weeks later, he turned up with a metal stand his son had made especially for me to lean on as I bowled. It was thin, with padded on the bottom so it didn't damage the grass on the green, and almost a meter high. It was immediate help. I was more stable when delivering a bowl, and it was much easier to keep my eyes focused when they needed to be. After that, there was no stopping me. I turned up for coaching on Saturday morning and spent hours listening to Frank, refining my techniques and trying it again and again. Frank would stand 3 or 4 meters in front of me as I delivered a bowl. Each time, he'd scoop the bowl off the ground and roll it back to me. "That's good, Robert. Try to keep your arm parallel to your leg," he would say. "Good bowl, Robert. Try to lock your elbow and bowl it from the shoulder." "That's a good bowl, Robert. Now try to release the bowl closer to the ground so it rolls out of your hand. Smoother." "Good bowl, Robert. But don't look at me when you bowl. Look straight ahead and where you want the bowl to end up. That's good, Robert. You gave your wrist a bit of a twist at the end, though, which is why it went off course. Try to lock it steady, like your elbows. That's a good bowl, Robert. You've got your wrist locked in place, but now you're bending your elbow again. That was Frank. Always with advice and always with a "that's a good bowl, Robert." So no matter what tweaks he wanted to make to me. Over and over again, until it was starting to feel almost unnatural not having the weight of the ball swinging in my hand. Frank would stand for hours in the hot Saturday sun, leaning over so he can get a look at my stance, sometimes standing in front of me, sometimes behind, sometimes beside. He watched intensely as I delivered bowl after bowl after bowl. I quickly came to realize all of this work was the price of playing a sport well. It was the price of what I wanted for so long, and I loved it. Our family Saturday morning routine was locked in. After breakfast, we'd go to the butcher and then the fruit and vegetable shop next door. We'd then go to the William Library, where my parents would wait patiently as I wandered around the shelves, hunting for new science fiction novels to read. The rule each week was that I could check out as many books as I could carry in one hand. I had big hands. Then, I'd be dropped off at the Bowls Club, where I'd spend a few hours practicing with Frank. On the last Tuesday before the Easter holiday, all the kids who did bowls headed onto the ex-services club, as usual, and had our roll-up. It was a good fun and everybody was excited. Holidays were so close you could smell them like sizzling sausage on a barbecue. As we were getting ready to leave, I saw Frank having a serious discussion with another volunteer. In fact, they were arguing. I inched a little closer, trying to pretend I wasn't listening. You shouldn't be infuriating by taking him for a special coaching session, the man was saying to Frank. That's rot, Frank said. You're here as a volunteer, and if he was going to get trained, it would be here at X Services, not your club. Frank just walked off, and I didn't get to talk to him before we were rounded up and onto the bus to head back to school. When I got home, I told Mom what I overheard. She said maybe I should have a think about whether I prefer to play on Tuesday afternoons or Saturday mornings with Frank. That's easy. I'd rather stay with Frank. That evening, Frank phoned to talk to Mom. He relayed a bit more of the argument and said he was very upset. He told Mom he would never go back to the other club. Mom told him she didn't want him to sever his ties with the club on my account, but he said he didn't care. Mom told Frank that as far as she and Dad were concerned, I had their approval to train with him, and how many of us spent our free time on weekends was no one else's business. You're clearly very upset about all of it, Mom said to Frank. Yes, I am, he said. Well, after Robert told me a bit about what happened this afternoon, I asked him what he wanted to do, and he said he wanted to stay with you, bowling on Saturday mornings. I thought Frank must have been saying an awful lot to Mom down on the phone, because there was a very long pause, but she told me when she got off the phone that he had said anything for a bit and then replied, Thank you. I'll sleep tonight now. After that, more training. Every month or so, Frank would find another player from William to compete against me. I'd win an individual end every now and then, but not very often. But I got to see firsthand how experts did it, with Frank looking over my shoulder, giving guidance the whole way. I'd been training for 6 months when Frank looked up at me and smiled one day. Robert, he said, I think you're ready. Ready for what, Frank? Well, I've talked to the club, told them all about the training you've been doing, and they've agreed, Frank said. I still didn't know what he was talking about. They've agreed you can join a team and start playing competitive competitions with the adults if you're ready, Frank said. The stand Frank's sons had made for me and all the training I had done meant I could play normal competition rather than signing up for disabled bowls. Wow, I said. I finally get a chance to compete in a team sport. So think you're ready? Frank asked. Abso-bloody-lutely, I said. Frank laughed. Good, he said, and smiled. I already put your name down for next week. And this is him playing game.